You don't have what it takes to run a business, little brother. Those words hit harder than I expected, considering they came from my own sister. My name is Michael Donnelly, and for 15 years, I was the engine that kept Donnelly Inns running, from maintenance contracts and staff management to day logistics at all 8 of our family's boutique hotels across New England. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't chasing headlines or investor spotlights. I just made sure guests were comfortable, employees were happy, and our margins stayed healthy. But all that ended the moment Catherine, my older sister, became president of the company, handpicked by our father when he decided to retire into a chairman role. 11 days in, and her first executive move was to fire me. "We've brought in a consultant from Westbridge Hospitality," she said, arms folded like a CEO out of a magazine ad. "The board agrees. We need new energy." The board, of course, being her 2 of her business school pals and Dad looking the other way. I packed my things without a word. But before I walked out, I left her with one last thought. Good luck finishing the Maple Grove renovation without me. Her confident smirk twitched. Just a little. She had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't about to warn her. As I drove away from our downtown Boston office with a cardboard box full of memories in the back seat, I didn't feel anger. Not exactly. I felt clarity. The kind that only comes when a storm finally clears, and you realize you saw it coming the whole time. Catherine thought she had surprised me, pulling the rug out after 15 years of loyalty and labor. But what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for that moment ever since Dad first mentioned stepping down. It happened 5 years ago. Over ribeye and baked potatoes at his favorite steakhouse in Concord, he leaned in and gave me a piece of advice I never forgot. "Michael, buildings come and go," he said. "That's what holds real power. Never put all your chips on what's above the ground. Own what's under it." I listened, quietly, carefully, while Catherine collected accolades and Instagram followers from hotel openings and travel summits. I spent my time differently. I reviewed contracts. I researched property deeds, and I noticed something. Our 3 most profitable locations, Portsmouth, Burlington, and Maple Grove, were sitting on leased land. Long-term leases signed decades ago when the original owners were still alive. Those original landlords had since passed, and their heirs were getting antsy. Some were looking to sell. That was my opening. I approached Dad with a quiet proposal. "Let me buy the land myself, personally, then lease it back to Donnelly Inns at the same rate. That way, we secure the land under our best assets and avoid a hostile buyer raising our rent or selling it out from under us." He raised an eyebrow at first. "That's a big investment, Mike." "I've been saving," I said, "and I believe in what we've built." 3 months later, thanks to a handshake deal with Dad and a loan secured through my bank, Donnelly Property Holdings was born, my own LLC, through which I acquired the land beneath all 3 flagship properties. Legally, it was all there in the corporate files, transparent, clean, and Catherine, in her laser focus on branding and press conferences, never even glanced at it. She signed the lease renewals every year without reading the attached entities. So when she fired me, without cause and without a clue, I didn't panic, because in exactly 3 months, those leases would come up for renegotiation, and this time they'd be at market rate. I spent the next morning the same way I had for over a decade, awake by 5:30 a.m., sipping black coffee on my back porch overlooking Boston Harbor. But this time, my phone didn't ring. No reports from overnight desk managers. No maintenance updates. No vendor hiccups. Just silence. Funny how quiet can sound like freedom when you spent years bracing for someone else's chaos. That same morning, I got a message from Tony, the head of maintenance over at Maple Grove. "Heard what happened. New consultants cutting corners already. Half the Reno plan's getting scrapped." I didn't respond with advice. Not my circus anymore. But I did feel a pang. These people weren't just coworkers. They were family. Many of them I had hired personally, walked through emergencies with, helped get their kids into schools, or covered shifts when someone had surgery. Catherine thought she was clearing out dead weight. What she was actually doing was severing the soul of the company. Later that week, I got a text from Dad. "Breakfast. Rosie's." 8 a.m., Rosie's Diner was our old haunt, 2 blocks from the Burlington property, where it had all started with Grandpa Donnelly in a single 6-room inn. Dad was already seated when I walked in. He looked older, wearier, a little more stooped than I remembered. She told me after the fact, he said, not even bothering with small talk. I would have handled it differently. But you didn't stop it, I replied. Not angry, just honest. He stirred his coffee and nodded slowly. She thinks Donnelly Inns needs to evolve. Less family style, more corporate structure. And you agree? I think. He paused. I think she's trying to prove something. Maybe to the board. Maybe to herself. Either way, it's moving too fast. I cut into my eggs and waited. The land, he added finally. She doesn't know you own it, does she? She's signed the leases for years, I said. She just never looked closely. He gave a tired smile. Your sister sees the forest. You see the roots. Exactly. And now she's trying to build an empire without checking if the ground will hold it. He sipped his coffee. You planning to raise the rent? I'm planning to charge what it's worth. He nodded slowly. That's gonna hurt. Maybe. But she fired the one person who could have helped her avoid it. We finished in silence. When I stepped outside, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. Just remember, Mike. You're not just protecting your stake. You're protecting the foundation of this whole thing. That stayed with me. Because he wasn't wrong. This was never about revenge. This was about making sure the people who built something real didn't get steamrolled by someone chasing a shiny new vision. And the clock was ticking. 3 months passed in quiet preparation. While Catherine played president, rolling out new ad campaigns and launching influencer partnerships. I sat in my home office, finalizing lease renewal terms with my attorney. The numbers weren't personal. They were market, standard, just business. Except to Catherine, business and ego were the same thing. I submitted the new lease agreements through my LLC, Donnelly Property Holdings, 10 days before the existing ones expired. That same afternoon, I received a call from Janine, Skycrest's head of legal. Michael, she said, her voice tight. Catherine's requesting clarification on some lease documents. She seems surprised. Tell her to read the signatures this time. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from Skycrest's legal team asking for all supporting documentation. My lawyer responded with everything on file. Purchase deeds, lease agreements, recorded payment history, all of it legitimate, all of it accessible in company records the whole time. I didn't hear from Catherine directly, just silence. Until one morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Dean, our long-time front desk manager at the Burlington property. Things are going downhill fast. New consultants trying to automate everything. Guests are complaining. Staff morale shot. Then another from Tony at Maple Grove. They're slashing maintenance again. Told us to defer all non-critical repairs. Leaks in the East Wing. This place is gonna fall apart. I wanted to step in, but I couldn't. That chapter was closed. I reminded myself I wasn't the operations manager anymore. But then came the email that changed everything. It was from our insurance provider, requesting clarification on recent ownership changes involving 3 key properties: Burlington, Portsmouth, and Maple Grove. Apparently, someone had attempted to update the policy records and hit a wall. Translation: Catherine had finally realized Skycrest didn't own the land under its crown jewels. I did. The next morning, Dad called. Did you know? He asked, voice flat. That Catherine doesn't read fine print? Yes! She's calling an emergency board meeting. Claims you've hidden critical information. Everything's in the corporate filings, I replied calmly. She just never looked. I could hear him sigh, tired and defeated. The leases, the rent's going up significantly. Isn't it? Market rate, nothing more. That'll gut our profit margins. Then maybe the company shouldn't have fired the guy who managed those margins. A long pause. You going to the meeting? I'm not on the board anymore, remember. Another pause. It's still your family's company. I didn't answer. That afternoon, I received another document from my attorney. A permit application had surfaced during a routine title check, filed by Catherine under her married name. It wasn't for a Skycrest property. It was for a new hotel development. Just outside Portsmouth, the applicant, a company called Kessler Vision LLC. Curious, I dug further. Multiple permit applications, one near each of our flagship hotels, same LLC, same sole owner, Catherine Kessler. While I'd been maintaining the legacy, Catherine had been laying the groundwork for a competing hotel chain on the same blocks as our most profitable properties, and firing me. That wasn't about fresh perspectives. It was about clearing the path. I forwarded the discovery to my lawyer, Patricia, and said 3 words. Start digging everything. 2 days later, Patricia had the full picture. Catherine had pitched Kessler Vision to investors as a modern luxury brand, targeting markets with proven demand, i.e. everywhere Skycrest was already succeeding. Her business plan, which Patricia obtained through a contact, referenced leveraging experience gained at Skycrest, retaining key clientele, and identifying opportunities for acquisition of distressed assets. Translation: she planned to run Skycrest into the ground, then buy the buildings at discount, using her new company. Except she forgot the part where I own the land, and I wasn't selling. The final twist came when I received a call from Wesley, one of Catherine's business school buddies who sat on the board. "Michael," he said, voice low. "She's pushing to sell Burlington, Portsmouth, and Maple Grove. Says the lease renewals make them unprofitable. And where does she plan to sell them? She won't say, but I'm hearing whispers. She's trying to have Kessler Vision buy them." I exhaled slowly. There it was, the playbook laid bare. "She's gambling with the company's crown jewels," I said. "Not for much longer," he replied. "The board's not blind. We just needed to know what was really going on." I hung up, my mind spinning. Catherine didn't just want control. She wanted to replace everything we'd built. Buildings, staff, reputation. Under her name on my land. But the difference between us was simple. I built foundations. She chased headlines. Now, I had leverage. Not to destroy her, but to protect what mattered: the people, the legacy, the truth behind the name, Donnelly. The next move would be mine, and it would change everything. I didn't attend the emergency board meeting. Instead, I caught the 6:45 a.m. flight to New York and met with someone who actually understood legacy: Julian Hayes, CEO of Commonwealth Hospitality. Julian and I had crossed paths at industry events over the years. Always polite, always respectful. He once offered me a leadership role with his firm, but I'd turned it down out of loyalty to Skycrest. A different time. A different man. Now, sitting across from him in his corner office overlooking Central Park, I placed a folder on the table and said, "Let me show you what she's trying to do." Inside was the full proposal: a partnership deal that would allow Commonwealth to acquire the buildings of the Burlington, Portsmouth, and Maple Grove hotels, while I retained ownership of the land and offered new fair lease terms. The plan preserved staff, kept properties running, and removed Skycrest from Catherine's games. Julian leaned back in his chair. "And she doesn't know you're doing this. She's too busy trying to buy them for her startup at fire sale prices," I said. "She thinks she can outmaneuver me." Julian studied me for a moment. "Why not just raise the rent and leave her stuck? Because she's launching a competing brand. If I lease to her, I'm enabling her betrayal." He gave a small smile. "So you'd rather partner with someone who respects the business?" "Exactly." By the end of the meeting, his legal team was already looped in, drafting proposals, running numbers, preparing to move fast once the board made their decision. 2 days later, the industry blog Lodging Insider broke the news: Commonwealth Hospitality rumored to be in talks to acquire key Skycrest properties amid operational turmoil. The article was short, speculative, and brutal. It cited insider concerns about leadership direction, flagging guest satisfaction scores, and untenable lease obligations, all true. Catherine's response was immediate. A company-wide email went out within hours. "There are no plans to sell any properties. Skycrest remains financially strong. Rumors are unfounded." But behind the scenes, she was rattled. That night, my father called. "She's furious," he said flatly. "Thinks you're orchestrating some kind of takedown. I'm protecting what we built." He was quiet for a moment. "She knows about your meetings." "I imagine she does now." His voice lowered. "Michael, what are you trying to accomplish?" I hesitated. That question had lived in my head for weeks. Revenge. Maybe at first. But now, accountability, I answered. And a future that doesn't rely on pretending she knows what she's doing. 3 weeks later, Skycrest posted its worst quarterly report in 7 years. Declining bookings. Rising operating costs. Negative guest feedback trending upward. The pressure mounted. That's when I received a formal request from the board, minus Catherine, for a private meeting to discuss strategic alternatives. I agreed, and on a brisk Thursday morning, I walked into the Skycrest conference room for the first time since my firing. The same polished floors, same walnut table. Only the tone had changed. Catherine sat at the head, arms crossed, chin raised, projecting defiance. Dad sat beside her, quieter, older. The rest of the board, Business school friends, former colleagues, one outside investor looked cautious. I sat at the opposite end, opened my portfolio and waited. Catherine spoke first. Let's be clear. My brother is attempting a hostile takeover of this company. I met her gaze without flinching. Incorrect. I'm exercising my rights as a property owner. I slid folders across the table. Copies of lease agreements, land deeds, and most importantly, permit applications filed by Kessler Vision LLC. While serving as Skycrest president, I said Catherine was also secretly building a competing hotel brand. Her business plan targeted our core markets. Her permits sit across the street from our top-performing properties. The room went silent. My father's face lost color as he flipped through the documents. He looked from one page to the next like trying to translate a language he'd never thought he'd have to read. This is absurd, Catherine spat. Kessler Vision is a consulting firm with hotel development permits in Burlington, Portsmouth, and Portland, I countered, and a business plan that explicitly states its intention to leverage Skycrest's brand equity. Dad turned to her. Is this true? She didn't answer. I turned to the board. Commonwealth's offer exceeds market value and includes full staff retention, renovation guarantees, and continued brand usage rights under new management. We're not gutting the properties. We're preserving them. This is betrayal, Catherine said quietly. You planned this. No, I said evenly. I protected the land 5 years ago. You're the one who chose to weaponize your ambition. The board voted. Unanimously. With one abstention, our father. As the motion passed, Catherine stood and stormed out, saying nothing. Wesley, her closest ally, approached me afterward. We'll ask for her resignation tomorrow. But we'll need interim leadership. I shook my head. I'm not interested in thrones. Just in building something that lasts. 1 year later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the Harborview Hotel, the new crown jewel of Commonwealth Hospitality's Northeast Collection. The sign out front had changed, but much remained the same. The staff, the warm atmosphere, the steady rhythm of ocean breeze sweeping through the glass doors. These weren't things you could replicate with branding consultants or flashy vision boards. They had been built over time, brick by people who cared. Miguel still ran maintenance. Eva, our front desk lead, had stayed through the transition. Most of our longtime staff had been retained, thanks to the partnership agreement I brokered with Julian Hayes. Their loyalty wasn't to a brand name. It was to one another, and to a way of doing things that valued effort over ego. Julian handed me a quarterly report as we leaned on the glass railing, looking out over Casco Bay. Revenues up 17% year over year, he said, a rare glint of pride in his normally even voice. West satisfaction scores, too. I nodded. People feel the difference. They always do. My role with Commonwealth was exactly what I had wanted: low profile, high impact. I was now consulting director for regional operations, overseeing quality standards, vendor negotiations, and mentoring younger managers. No boardrooms full of politics, no empty titles. Just solid work and solid people. Julian glanced over at me. You ever regret not stepping in at Skycrest? After everything? I thought about that. After Danielle's removal, the board had offered me the presidency, a chance to rebuild, to rebrand, to steer the company forward. But by then, I knew better. I didn't want to run a company built on broken trust. I finally replied. I wanted to help grow one built on purpose. He gave a small smile. Well, it shows. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. Dinner tonight. Bringing the grandkids. 6 p.m. I smiled as I typed back. Wouldn't miss it. After the dust settled, my father had quietly stepped away from Skycrest. His decision wasn't announced or celebrated. It was simply a quiet transition. He said he was tired. I believed him. The company still existed, but it had never truly recovered from the fallout. The 5 remaining properties struggled to match the consistency of their Commonwealth-acquired cousins. Staff turnover increased, vendor relationships soured, and guest loyalty eroded. As for Danielle, her startup Kessler Vision filed for bankruptcy protection 5 months after the board vote. Turns out launching a luxury brand from the rubble of sabotage was harder than it looked. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even return her final voicemail, which had arrived sometime between investor pullouts and legal filings. It was short, measured cold. You win, Michael. Hope you're proud. But it was never about winning. It was about fixing what had been fractured, quietly, cleanly, and without losing myself in the process. Some things, however, couldn't be repaired. My relationship with Danielle remained distant. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, and yet, I never let that wall extend to her children. They were my niece and nephew, and I made sure our bond remained strong. Movie nights, science fairs, and Saturday morning pancakes whenever I could. They weren't responsible for the bitterness their mother clung to. That night, over roast chicken and root vegetables, my father passed me the mashed potatoes and gave a faint, tired smile. "You know," he said softly, "I always thought your sister had the vision." I scooped a spoonful and passed the bowl down the table. "She did," I replied. "It just wasn't for the same future I wanted." He nodded slowly. "And you, what was your vision?" I looked around the table. At the kids laughing, at the sun setting through the dining room window, at the people still standing after all the storms. "A foundation," I said. "Something that lasts longer than ambition." After dinner, as I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes, my father joined me. We worked in silence for a while, something we'd always been good at. Quiet presence. "You built something better, Michael," he said eventually. "Better than I did. Better than either of us saw coming." I set the plate down. I just paid attention to the cracks. Outside, the porch light flickered on. The kids were chasing fireflies. My father's silhouette lingered in the doorway for a moment, then disappeared back into the warmth of the living room. I stayed a while longer, looking out into the evening, letting the peace settle in. Danielle had played the game for glory. I'd played for resilience. And in the end, what stood firm wasn't the building with the flashiest name or the slickest presentation, but the one with the deepest roots. The one grounded in values, in people, in patience. 3 months later, I found myself walking down a quiet corridor at the Harbor View Hotel, once Westbrook, now reborn under Commonwealth. I paused outside one of the suites I'd helped design during the renovation. The room smelled of fresh linen and ocean air. Everything was in place, everything was calm. But inside me, something stirred, not unrest, not regret, just completion. The morning's agenda had included meetings with vendors, a walkthrough of our Portland property, and a training session for new assistant managers. Nothing flashy, just the rhythm of a company doing what it promised to do: serve people well, treat employees fairly, and build something that wasn't always chasing the next shiny thing. As I reviewed maintenance logs on my tablet, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Vincent Ross, now acting chairman of Skycrest's board. "Michael, the board would like to invite you for a conversation." No agenda, just coffee and clarity. I stared at the message for a long time. Clarity. That was a word we hadn't used in our family for years. Later that evening, over black coffee at a quiet corner cafe in Boston, I sat across from Vincent. He looked tired but hopeful. "I won't waste your time," he began. Danielle officially stepped down. "The board is considering options for restructuring. We've all seen the contrast between the Commonwealth properties and what's left of Skycrest." I listened silently as he continued. "We've lost the trust of our staff. Guests notice the inconsistency. Morale's low, and we're operating on razor-thin margins. We need guidance." "And you think I can provide that?" I asked, sipping my coffee. Vincent leaned forward. "You already did. Skycrest's strongest years were under your operational leadership. We see that now." I set my cup down. "So what are you asking exactly?" he exhaled. "Would like you to return, not as president, not in a political role, but as a partner, an advisor. Help us stabilize what's left." It was tempting, not out of pride but out of purpose. Yet I'd also learned the cost of stepping into places that hadn't healed. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly, "but I'm already doing the work I believe in, with the people I trust. I don't need to be back at the table. I just need to know the ship isn't sinking." Vincent nodded. "Then maybe you'd consider sending someone in your place. Someone with your values, your approach." Now that was a conversation I was willing to continue. By the following month, Rachel Adams, a former colleague I'd mentored for years, joined Skycrest as director of hotel operations. Young, sharp, and respected by the rank and file, she brought back structure and integrity where it had eroded. With my quiet support from behind the scenes, she started rebuilding what mattered: trust. Meanwhile, news quietly surfaced in the hospitality world. Kessler Vision had officially dissolved. The permits Danielle had filed were revoked, and her investors had filed claims against her for breach of contract and misrepresentation. It was a quiet fall from grace. Press conferences. No statements, just silence. One day I received an unexpected letter. Handwritten, no return address. You were right. About the foundation. About what matters. I thought I could outgrow the family business. But I never understood what made it strong. You did. You always did, D. I folded the note and set it in a drawer in my home office. I didn't need to reply. Some acknowledgments are enough on their own. Weeks turned into months. Commonwealth's Northeast portfolio flourished. Our guest return rate rose to 84%, and staff turnover dropped below industry averages. In Portland, Burlington, and Harbor View, employees weren't just staying. They were thriving. I'd walk the halls and hear laughter. I'd spot familiar faces mentoring newcomers. I saw something I hadn't seen in years prior. And every now and then, during quiet nights when the wind curled in from the Atlantic and the city lights blurred in the harbor, I'd sit on that rooftop terrace and remind myself. None of this had been about revenge. It had been about protecting the legacy. Not the kind carved in granite or etched on glass conference room doors, but the kind built with real people, steady hands, and quiet grit. The kind my grandfather believed in. The kind my father once embodied. The kind I would leave behind. Not as a title holder, but as the one who watched for cracks, who held the line when others rushed for the spotlight. Danielle may have tried to turn Skycrest into a game of strategy. But I had always played the long game, and now it was paying off in ways that mattered most. One year after the boardroom reckoning, I stood alone at the Harbor View's rooftop terrace. Just as the sun dipped behind the Atlantic, the breeze was cool, but it carried something warm, quiet peace. Downstairs, the hotel hummed with life. Guests checking in, staff smiling, systems running like clockwork. The kind of place where people felt seen and cared for. I hadn't chased a title. I hadn't shouted for recognition. But in the end, what I built had endured. Not because it was loud, but because it was solid. My phone buzzed. A picture from my niece and nephew, them holding up, Employee of the Month, badges at a summer job. At the very hotel their mother once tried to use for her gain. Full circle. Sometimes, the strongest legacy is built in silence, not through power plays or press releases, but in the foundations we lay when no one's watching. Titles fade. Ambition burns out. But integrity, that lasts. And when betrayal strikes, you don't always need revenge. Just truth, time, and trust in your own path. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated only to rise stronger? Or hit subscribe so you don't miss more real life stories where quiet strength wins in the end. Because here on Behind the Quiet, we don't shout, we build.